and welcome to this episode of Al's Garage. I'm doing a sheet metal project on the driver's side and need some 18 gauge sheet metal. The place I buy it from doesn't open until Monday, and it's Sunday morning right now, so I figured this is a great opportunity to get my carburetor rebuilt. Now, this is the Carter YF Carburetor that goes in our 1943 Willys MB project. And if you know a lot about World War II Jeeps, you're saying, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. And you're correct. Originally, the carburetor that went with these World War II Jeeps, Ford GPW and Willys MBs, was the Carter WO, which is this one. Now, what we pulled out of this project is the Carter YF. And the reason for that, which I've mentioned in some previous videos, is the fact that in the late 50s or early 60s, our owner bought this Jeep in 1957, so sometime after that, the original engine ended up being tired enough, so he had it replaced. He went down to a local place here in the Phoenix area, and they did an engine swap with a DJ engine, which was, in my best guess, something out of a early 60s DJ-3A. Now, those engines came with the Carter YF carburetor. Now, what I've been told is, and it makes perfect sense here, is that the Carter YF carburetor is a little more high performance, it's a little more powerful. That paired up with the intake manifold, obviously the more modern intake manifold, gives you a little bit higher performance when it comes to these four-cylinder engines, which is nice and kind of a benefit here. So we're going to stick with that just because obviously that's what's been on this vehicle, and the owner isn't looking to make it original in that regard. He just wants a running, driving vehicle, so that's what we're going to do. Anyway, before we get started, a few notes about the Carter YF carburetor. If you start researching Carter YF carburetors, there's an early version, which is what this is. Then there's a later Carter YF, which has some other features. It doesn't have the specific look as this one does. And I think one of the things that's unique is it has this dark, I forget what this metal is, either steel or cast iron. I think it's cast iron is what they go on these bottom ones. So a little bit different from the earlier to the later Carter YFs. In addition, there's the Carter YFA, and usually those are pretty identifiable because they have a automatic choke, which is obviously a black plastic unit that sits on the outside. So the other vehicles that these Carter carburetors went into, these Carter YFs, were some Chevys, like Chevy 235 six-cylinder engines, and even some later six-cylinder engines. Also with Willys, these carburetors, this specific one, went in not only the DJs, but also the, I believe the six-cylinder Super Hurricanes that were in the Willys pickup trucks and station wagons. So a lot of different uses, so just do your research as you're trying to figure this out. But what we want to do before we get started here, one of the first things I obviously noted is we have one of these wing nut connectors for home electrical. I see this on there. That was kind of my first question mark. What goes there? Because clearly this isn't supposed to go there. And my discovery was that this is a vacuum line. So a brass plug threaded in would be the solution there. So that would work, but I think I'm going to go in a different direction than the home connector. So before I take this apart, I'm going to take it outside and just shoot it with some carb cleaner. There's a lot of dust and dirt in here, and as I take it apart, I don't want any of that getting on the internal components. So let's do that real quick. So after cleaning this with carb cleaner and compressed air, I've got all of the loose dirt and gunk and everything off of it. At this point, we're going to take the carburetor apart and clean all of our passageways and areas that might have collected dirt, like inside here, or the bottom of our fuel bowl, which is this area. Now, my goal for this is to just take it apart, clean it, put it back together, and hopefully have it running well. The barriers to that would be if my diaphragm pump, which we'll get to, is ripped or rotten, and if I break one of my gaskets pulling this thing apart. If I do that, then I'll just get a carb kit, but my thought is if we can, get it cleaned up, put back together, it'll get down the road. It's pretty straightforward, and that applies to any carburetor, really, unless it has wear in jets. We'll take a look at a couple of the different areas that might have wear. So sometimes it is necessary to really rebuild a carburetor, and when I say rebuild, I mean, put new, check balls and all sorts of stuff in there. But other times you can just clean one up, put it back together, and it'll run good as long as a few of the key components are, within spec. And I mean, they don't have junk or dirt in them. I mean, these old Jeeps are pretty forgiving, but there's a few key areas that really need to be precise, and that's a lot of those are here in the carburetor. So let's take this apart and see what we can come up with. So you can see there is some residue on the float that goes in the fuel bowl here. That needs to obviously be cleaned off, and we can do that here in a moment. But one thing to note here on the carburetor, this is obviously our movement of our float, and you can adjust that both on these tabs, which are pretty soft, and on this internal tab in here, and that controls how much fuel gets into this jet, which again, we'll take this off and clean it as well. But I don't want to adjust any of that because I don't know what the specs are, and it was working fine. So I think that leaving it as is a good place to start. If there is a challenge there, that's something we can tackle later on, but for now, let's just keep everything the way it was and just clean it. So the next thing is pulling this gasket off. Obviously, as I mentioned before, if I rip this gasket here, then it's new carburetor kit time. So I'm going to try to refrain from doing that. Bingo. All right, we will clean this gasket up. I'll set that right there. All right, I see don't know if it's clear, you can actually see some sludge down there at the bottom of the fuel bowl. Let's take this outside and blow this out with our carb cleaner. I think that'd be a good first step to getting all of this cleaned out. So we have our bottom section of our carburetor. Obviously this piece has to come out, and I said that this component is for vacuum. Now we can fill that in with a brass plug, which I will fasten in here once we put this thing together. But if you have a carburetor with this type of configuration, that's what you'd want to do. You definitely, you know, this will work, and amazingly enough it did, but this is, I think, a better way to do it. So we have our bottom part of our carburetor pulled apart here, and you can see there's really two adjustments to make. This is your idle air control mixture, which adjusts your lean and rich at roughly idle speed and maybe a little bit faster. And then this is your idle speed adjustment. So that'll actually adjust what RPM your engine is currently, you know, at when obviously it's at idle and you're not pushing the pedal down. So a few things to keep in mind, and actually if you look closer, you can see, you know, this piece just floats along here, but will rest against this screw, and so adjusting this in or out allows for your idle speed there. So what I will do is clean both these, pull them out, and figure out how far in each one is, and then you know, put them back to whatever spec they originally were. So I'm going to do that right now. So at this point I wrote down where my idle speed screw and my idle air control valve, that lean rich screw, where they currently were. Now, as much as it's good to determine where those were, when I put this thing together, obviously there's been some gunk and whatnot. You know, there's going to be some adjustments here. One of the adjustments is where our little electrical fitting for our home, you know, wing nut connector was sitting here. Now, I imagine this did a decent job of sealing this up and keeping the engine running, but what we want to replace it with is a brass valve that's essentially a brass plug. I'll maybe even throw some fuel resistant Teflon tape in here, and this will create a full seal. Now, inevitably, I imagine there would be some variance in the level of sealing that this will do versus the level of sealing that this will do. So as we get the carburetor on, we get the engine running, we tune it up, there obviously will be a little bit of variance and change that we'll need to do to get the thing running. So at this point, I have the carburetor pretty much torn apart. I have all of my parts laid out. I'm going to take some pictures. I obviously, you know, my workbench is kind of dirty. It's, you know, as it relates to like this wood surface. So that's why I laid it out on this nice, clean clean paper towels, which I recommend if you're going to do something like this to any carburetor, that you clean, lay it out on a nice clean surface. So I'm going to go through and using lacquer thinner, I'm going to do some various cleanup work on all of these components. One thing to note, if I was doing a restoration, these parts you could really throw in like a parts tumbler or like a professional washing equipment and get it looking really nice and shiny bright. But really, in this case, we're just going for clean where it needs to be clean. So let's get started cleaning up our parts. With all my parts clean, there's two areas I wanted to blow compressed air through. One was here, which comes out here and has to do with my diaphragm. Obviously, this is where the diaphragm pushes fuel up, and I wanted to make sure there's no restricting elements in there. The other is I wanted to blow air through this passage, and let me see if I can tee it up, put it in the right position here. I wanted to blow it through this passage because there, if you can see, is a hole right in here, and that is essentially where your fuel goes down through and squirts into the intake. So I wanted to make sure there was no restrictions in those two areas. From here, I'm going to put all of this aside. I'll back up here. I'm going to put all of these parts aside in a place where they're not going to get messed up or out of order. And then I'm just at this point going to wait until my kit arrives, and then we'll put it together. So we're back here working on the carburetor. About 5 days have passed since I did my last work on this. So hopefully not enough time for me to forget how to put all this back together, but we do have our carburetor rebuild kit. So we're going to open that right now, make sure everything looks good, put it back together. Okay, this all looks pretty close. What I'm going to do, again, this was Mikes Carburetor. I got this kit by looking at the number. Let's see. Oh, here it is. There's a number right here. Mine is 964S, and Mikes Carburetor had a page with the YF and YFA carburetors so that I could look this up, and that in a sense told me which kit was available. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. and I'm going to arrange it so that I have some of my replacement parts sitting next to in a way that, you know, doesn't get them mixed up, but gets it so that I can see the different parts and essentially put it in a way that I can just build it from here. So let's do that. Okay, we got these guys over here. And really, you know, all of these parts are great, but one part that I really needed is my accelerator pump diaphragm. So I can see, you can see the difference here. This is nice and rubbery and flexible, whereas this is, you know, just pretty well toast. So this is a good part to have. I'm going to go ahead and set all this up, then we're going to start putting this together. So I have a carburetor that is pretty close to set up at this point. As you saw, I struggled with my check ball and check weight, which we can, there they are coming out, of course. So my check ball is the new ball. The old one, I could definitely see some gunk and corrosion, which certainly would not seat properly. So this is good to be using that rebuilt part. And then we have our check weight, which has a little bit of room here. So I will be bench testing this in order, and let me adjust it here. I will be bench testing it to make sure that my pump works. What it's going to do is going to suck the gas in and have it come out here. I'm going to then push this down, and then there should be a little hole that you can see right in. Let me get my screwdriver. Right there. And we're going to look for gas to come out of that. So we will, let me set it right. We're going to make sure that this is working, and then we can put together the rest of the carburetor. Throw just a little more mineral spirits in here. Okay. I'm going to I have to hold this up a little bit because I attached the linkage to my accelerator pump here. Okay, I think you can already see that it didn't take much for it to come out the top here, obviously. Now, what I'm going to do, which I know is going to be successful, is I'm going to clean this up here and hold this down, and you should be able to see mineral spirits come out the end there. Assuming I can. make this happen. Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. You can see a little squirt here. Whoop. I'm making a mess. But either way, you can see what we're going for here. I just wanted to make sure that it was squirting out this. Essentially, that is what happens when you push down on the gas pedal. This pushes down, and that whole circuit seems to work good. From here, let's put the top of the carburetor back on and wrap things up. So that's it for our Carter YF Carburetor rebuild. A few notes: our idle adjustment screw is set out 1 3/4 turns. It calls for 1.5 turns, but this was originally out 3 turns, so I think we're kind of meeting in the middle. I know that it's going to behave a little bit differently given that we have a brass plug that's in there, nice and sealed. So my hope is that a turn in 3/4 should get us started. From there, we'll be able to adjust as needed. From here, I'm taking this carburetor and I'm going to stick it in a freezer bag, nice and sealed so that no dust or anything can get in there, and then we'll have it ready to go when it's time to put it on the vehicle. Also, I'm going to take all of the extra parts from the rebuild kit, because obviously most rebuild kits are for multiple carburetors. You got some extra stuff here. And then I'm also going to take all my old parts. I'm going to put all of that in a bag just so I have it. I want to make sure that this thing is running and tuned up before I start throwing any parts away. So that's a good tip to have. I want to thank Mikes Carburetor. They sent me this carb kit in a few business days. They have a great YouTube channel that has some great videos for reference, which I will link to the description here, in my description, so you can reference those if you're rebuilding one of these. They also have a assembly sheet, which is a 4-page PDF. I'll link that as well, and it's a great resource. It has an exploded diagram of how everything goes, and that was great for me as I was putting this thing together. So these 1-barrel carburetors, they're simple, but there's a few things that you want to make sure you get right. So I think that we did that here, and hopefully this was a great reference for you and a good resource. If you like the video, like and subscribe. We're going to keep working on this 1943 Willys MB project here. So again, I hope you found this helpful. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.